So hello and welcome to the latest webinar in the Elemental Talks program for 2022. Our topic today, creating and maintaining healthy buildings from inception to completion and beyond, in our session sponsored by the lovely people at ACO. Your chair for the next 60 minutes, my name is Jim McClelland, founder and editor SustMeme, home to both the magazine and the top 500 rankings. Joining me on the panel this morning are Oliver Heath, biophilic design guru, author, TV presenter and director at Heath Design, Eddie Murphy, founder Olio, the building performance consultancy, and Chris Jones, CEO of HomeLink, which is part of ACO. It is all live, as you will see. Q&A to finish, so pop your questions in the Ask a Question box at the bottom of your screen. The clue's in the name. You pose them, I'll ask them, they'll answer them. So a little bit about Elemental, for those not familiar. This is forming part of a program of talks and webinars hosted and produced by Elemental, elementalexpo.com. It's the online community for professionals focused on innovation in heat, water, air, and energy, the vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. You find a full diary of events on the website, a range of upcoming webinars, and a big back catalogue, whole host of topics, all available on demand. Great who's who of speakers, and I should add, everything is free to access, air and share. Plus, for this year, the physical real world in-person Elemental Expo is coming to the NEC in Birmingham alongside the Installer Show 21 to 23 June this year, 2022. So get the dates in your diary. See you there. Right, we have a lot to cover, so there'll be a brief intro to the content from me, a little bit about healthy buildings just to set the scene. So, term healthy buildings, it's risen in use over recent years, partly, of course, because of UK government ambitions to shrink the carbon footprint of our existing building stock. Buildings can be key promoters of occupant health and well-being, especially living with COVID-19 and most people spending more of their time indoors. Creating a so-called healthy building is not without its challenges, but it's achievable, it's doable. Keeping a building healthy, however, is another story, as we're probably going to discuss. Many end users completely in the dark with regards to thermal performance, the air quality of their buildings, not to mention levels of damp, required maintenance, well-being of occupants. So today we're going to discuss how to create and maintain these healthy buildings, considering issues such as what defines a healthy building and in what ways do buildings impact our health? How can property owners ensure the health of their buildings year after year, crucially, and how important is the role of smart technology to healthy building status? The session builds on two previous webinars run in association with ACO, which you can check out. Breathe Right, which was the importance of air quality in today's built environment, and reducing cost whilst increasing comfort, the business case for smart buildings. As I say, they're both available on demand for you to watch later, or rewatch even. Right, let the debate begin. Enough from me. So, we start to explore what it means to create a healthy building in the first place, then maintain it sustainably, plus some of the challenges. I'd like to begin, obviously, by asking our panel to introduce themselves, explain their perspective, share some opening insights. So it's briefly kind of, who are you? Where do you fit into the puzzle? Where do you think we are right now in the UK in terms of healthy buildings from inception to completion and beyond, which does sound a bit Buzz Lightyear, I have to say. So first of all, a designer's perspective on health, biophilia and well-being in buildings. Oliver, your opening thoughts, please.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, my name is Oliver Heath. I'm an architectural and interior designer and the founder of Oliver Heath Design. We are writers, researchers, designers and advocates for health and well-being in the built environment, with a particular focus on this emerging subject of biophilic design, or essentially how we enhance the human connection to nature in the buildings that we live and work in. And I think this is important because fundamentally our health and well-being is intrinsically connected to the health and well-being of the nature around us. So far from just bringing plants and greenery into spaces, it does look at this deeper connection to nature across our planet, across our cities, our neighborhoods, our streets, our buildings, and into the interior spaces that we create. And I believe that health and well-being is all about how we support people's physical health, but also their mental well-being, their emotional states, and their social well-being. So it's far greater than just sort of some of the quantitative aspects of just sort of how do we measure light or heat or temperature or air quality, but really looks at how we look at those sort of probably more sort of difficult sort of qualitative aspects of health and well-being, the more human-centered aspects, I guess. So a lot of our work is around research. So we've written a number of white papers about how we can bring biophilic design and health and well-being into the built environment and many benefits it brings. Our approach is very evidence-based, so it always looks at the work of environmental psychologists over the last 20 to 30 years to demonstrate the value, and that we do encourage organizations not just to rely on that existing data, but to continue at through the creation of pre- and post-occupancy evaluations, and we've written a white paper about that, just to kind of get into the subject. I feel that this subject has been heightened, brought forward and exacerbated, accelerated by the pandemic, because obviously everybody's been thinking about the health and well-being. I think without the diversity of spaces that we would ordinarily have in our lives, from our homes, our commuting, our workspaces and hospitality spaces, we're now much more focused and recognize that actually the four walls that we surround ourselves with do have a definite impact on us. Yep. And as a result of that, health and well-being has moved from the commercial world and into the domestic world. And as a result of that, we wrote a book quite recently called Design a Healthy Home, which looks at some of the metrics and research that we've seen in the commercial world and tries to reconfigure them into the domestic environment.
Excellent, thank you, Oliver. So already enhancing the human connection to nature, intrinsic links, health and well-being, physical, mental, and social. Nice point there. Qualitative, not just quantitative, and how COVID obviously has moved so much of what we're going to be talking about up the agenda, at least temporarily, I might add. We might discuss whether some of those learnings are going to stick necessarily. So Eddie, coming now to you. So as an expert focused on the actual performance of buildings, healthy or otherwise, your opening insights, please.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be sharing this virtual podium with you and the Elemental audience again this year. I'm Eddie Murphy, Eddie Murphy, call me, whichever you feel best with. I'm a chartered building services engineer, a fellow of SIPSI, a member of ASHRI, the American Society of Heating and Refrigeration Engineers. I'm also an accredited well-build practitioner. And also, for my sins, an accredited Scrum Master. So a lot of you probably won't have come across what a Scrum Master is. It's worth checking out that, just do a Google on what one is. My career has effectively always been in building services, design, consultancy. I spent a good deal of my time at White Young Greens, Arab, directorship at McClelland. All of that came before I started Olio, the building performance consultancy. Which, as the name suggests, specializes in getting to buildings that perform for users more especially. What I'm interested in is getting buildings that do for users what they are supposed to do for users. I called it Olio because if you spell it out, you get the kind of 0 to 10 on the presumption that, at least in my experience, any project that I've ever dealt with that's ever gone wrong, you can usually go back to the first 10% of time, those initial crafting of ideas and locking in of strategy. And if it wasn't done in the first 10% properly, somewhere along the line, it was then going to fail. So Olio concentrates on that first 10% of time. We also bookend it with the last 10% because that can be equally as important. The process of conducting post-occupancy evaluation, performance diagnostics for clients, and just making sure, again, that the building does what it's supposed to do, that it does what designers intended it to do. So we specialize in getting to better zero carbon, better health outcome, better health and well-being outcomes, and also ultimately better post-occupancy outcomes. So all of those interfaces that go between business and users. Our clients are usually architects. We're niche, we're innovative, connected to research and academia, but ultimately embedded in design practice. When it comes to health and well-being, I would say our interest in health and well-being buildings has increased, or the interest has increased in the last decade. Probably got many parallels between health and well-being and sustainability and climate change, insofar as it's really hard for people and organizations to actually be seen to have buildings that do no harm. And I think organizations are struggling with the fact that they want sustainability and climate change plus well-being to be things that they embrace as part of their sort of organizational strategies. Paul Schaller, the guy who developed World Building Program, he was good friends with David Gottfried, who started the US GBC and the LEED program. So that well-being and sustainability thing has always been very, very close. Schaller, I think, was quite open about the fact that the health and well-being agenda is actually being driven primarily by young people who are interested in preventative health. They don't want to wait to get sick. They want to prevent the visit to the medic or GP. So we're looking at highly educated, positive health outcomes being the basis of many of the lifestyle changes of young people in this day. And they expect their organization to embrace that and be part of that interest that they have in it. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Excellent. Thank you, Eddie. So buildings that perform for users and minimum do no harm, and I think we'll probably discuss about how they can do rather more than just do no harm. Olio, 0 to 10, as it were, the first and the last 10%, both. And interesting note about the influence of the younger generation looking for a more preventative approach, not waiting for the problem before we address it. So now coming to you, Chris, in this first round, obviously. So when it comes to IoT, data analytics and apps, how smart is health?
Hi, so Chris Jones. I'm the CEO of HomeLink, lead the HomeLink team, and HomeLink is a brand of Eco. So Eco smart home brand, and Eco, one of the biggest smoke and CO alarm manufacturers in the UK, with about 95% market share in social housing. So I'm just going to quickly frame what we care about. So the problem that we're working on is, the indoor environment has an absolutely massive impact on our health. And it's clear to see, there's stats out there that say in the indoor environment indoor air quality is 2 to 5 times worse than outdoor. There's a huge proportion of cost NHS, a huge aspect of our physical and mental health, which has already been discussed. There's a recent shelter research that said 22% of all renters say that they're being harmed by the conditions that their poor quality housing. So that's nearly a quarter. And that includes both physical and mental health. And they cite things like not being able to heat their home and mold. But actually, they're just the things they can see. And I think if people could see the other things that really do the impact, like PM 2.5, VOCs and everything else, it would be a lot more than that. So it's a huge, absolutely massive issue. And it's one that we've known about for hundreds of years, even though that now homes are probably indoor air quality could be even argued to be worse than previously because of challenges with retrofit. But prior to NHS, you had the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health had in its remit housing. So it's been known for a very long period of time. And it seems like for a long while, people have forgotten this. And I guess it's that thing. People don't. If you can't see it or feel it, then you don't think it affects you. But the reality is it does. And the reason that we don't see it or feel it is because it's a new thing. Like, we've not evolved alongside this issue. We've not, over hundreds of thousands of years, we've not had to worry about indoor air quality and spraying chemicals and, using gas to cook and everything else. Over-occupied buildings, mold. These aren't issues of human history. And like anything that's been introduced by people in recent times, like processed food, things like smoking and a number of other things, driving cars and metal boxes that speed down motorways, they have a huge impact on us. And yes, this is what we can see is this massive issue in society. All the science backs it up, and we can see now that people are starting to change their attitudes to it, becoming more aware. There's a lot of macroeconomic factors that are driving that, from obviously COVID, climate change, and the need to retrofit our housing stock. But also things like that shelter research, the fact that the ombudsman's in housing is getting, the complaints are doubling year on year, particularly with disrepair. And there's a number of ITV and BBC documentaries calling out social landlords. So this is clearly going to be something that we look back in 50 years' time, and it would be something that I'll be telling my grandkids about, and they'll be thinking, how could people live like, it's like when I look back at cars that when they didn't have seatbelts. Or when you look at, the fact that people grew up in peated houses that were full of smoke, it's kind of unheard of now. And the fact that we're blind to air quality is going to be something where it will be unheard of in 50 years from now. And what's really interesting is that all these challenges and this public awareness is increased at a time where there's been advances in technology. So things like better battery power, better communications technologies, lower cost to manufacture sensors has made this kind of proliferation of IoT. And this has been happening for decades in other higher value industries. So It's completely transformed business models in aerospace. So Rolls-Royce can lease engines rather than sell them because they can monitor them and make sure they're preventatively and effectively maintained. There's thousands of IoT sensors in your car that probably many people, you probably only know 2 of them. They're just absolutely everywhere. And it's now the asset that costs us the most money that we're all in debt for, or most of us. It's now the time that we're connecting that. And yeah, we just, and just to quickly say what we offer. So right now our ecosystem is smoke, carbon monoxide, humidity, CO2 temperature detectors, and we generate a number of insights around like thermal efficiency, mold risk, air quality, things like that, mostly aimed at social housing to help solve a number of these different challenges. But yeah, because of this combination of technology, public awareness, the fact that it's included in a lot of standards, whether it's PAS 2035, Future Home Standard, EASH in Scotland, or wherever it might be, and these other macroeconomic factors like COVID and climate change. These technologies are going to be absolutely, it's going to be everywhere, and probably be a legal requirement, just like smoke alarms are now, and they weren't 40 years ago, 30 years ago. We've already, I think we've got 100,000 connected IoT devices in social housing today. That's already connected. There's 150,000 sold, and in the last 4 months, we've doubled that number. That was 50,000 4 months ago. So this isn't just a good idea; it's also happening quite quickly.
Excellent, nice insights there. So yeah, as you say, indoor air quality. We understand there is a direct cost to the NHS, and the huge numbers you cited, renters who have issues with quality and condition of their housing. I think you suggest it's kind of 1 in 4, which is an unbelievable number, really. But it's still, there's an element of it being an invisible threat, particularly around air quality. But there's available and affordable, crucially, tech now that can change that and give us that kind of visibility. So nice introductions to the topic there. But then this middle section now, and I would remind our audience, pop your questions in the ask a question box at the bottom, and our panelists have kindly shared a number of links in the chat as well, so there's some background and further reading which you'll be able to pick up some of the things we've been discussing. But in this middle section then, we've set the scene, but I want to get into challenges and conflicts. So this is the difficult middle part of our debate, if you like. Zooming on specifics, challenge the panel, why the healthy buildings journey is so slow. Why obstacles still frustrate progress on such a fundamental topic? What's the problem? Is it lack of understanding? Is it demand, cost, culture, tech, markets? So I'm going to be asking kind of what needs to happen for healthy to become the new normal, not just desirable, but necessary both to do and crucially keep doing. So Eddie, coming to you first then in this more challenging section. So shall we say we've been here before? Building performance and use over time so often fail to get the attention it deserves once a project reaches so-called completion, before occupants, tenants, residents even set foot in the place. The industry moves on. Literally, off-site is out of mind. So my challenge to you is, why should we suddenly expect the sector to start taking healthy seriously and, by implication, start taking responsibility for ongoing performance and user experience? Why is that going to change, Eddie?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to look at the nub of the problem. And as a POE specialist, I go back to a lot of buildings, and I see that interface between people using buildings, the organisation, and what's being presented to them. It's something I've spent, over 10 years, studying in one sense or another. And for me, there are 2 related things happening here. The first one is really our industry is very bad when it comes to allowing our clients to accept more responsibility for the final build outcome. In some sense, we want to keep our clients away from the process of developing what the end result is going to be. Equally, clients don't see the connection between the building they buy and the productivity of the people who will use it. There's a complete disconnect, as far as that's concerned. Now, I should have put a link in the chat, and I'll do so later, but there's a Leesman 250 case study which was done back in 2018, and that proved direct causal links between good buildings where clients had invested a lot of time in making sure that they got the right product at the end of the day, and the end productivity of the people who actually use them. 90% of business costs are people costs. So why does business? I fail to understand myself why business has still not made that connection between a good building and better business, when actually, even if you only raise the productivity by 10%, you would most likely get your building back, the cost of your building back within 5 years. So we only ever, and as an industry, we're only ever interested in giving our clients off the peg solutions when we know that, that off the peg solutions are actually, well, clients should really know that off the peg solutions are the ones that are actually doing more harm than good. So secondly, I don't think any of this is because organizations don't care about their people. I think when you look under the bonnet of organizations, you do start to find resistance to the development of user-centric buildings. And this is more to do with businesses really having, I suppose, different concerns, if you like. Most businesses are really concerned. We've seen it in the pandemic. Most businesses are actually concerned with survival instinct. And so the day-to-day is really what they're more interested in. When it comes to health and well-being, that goes into what we might call the thrive instinct. And thrive is actually more to do with actually dealing with real and destructive change that's actually coming on a day-to-day basis. Now, the problem is that when we actually deal with this, to actually deal with thrive, organizations have to purposely say, okay, we want a thrive strategy. So we want a strategy that's actually going to deal with a particular problem, a clear and present problem. And so they actually then have to put additional resources, additional people, and usually a small amount of people to actually get to that thrive strategy. So because we have this parallel of survive, and so everything a business wants to do is just survive, as opposed to health and well-being and climate change and sustainability and all of those other things, they're in what they seem to have as, what they seem to care as, or put as the thrive strategy. So we needed somehow to actually move, health and well-being from that thrive into survive. It needs to become something that is of clear and present danger to the strategy of the building. And we've seen that with the pandemic. So all of a sudden, something, the amount of change that actually happened in our organizations, because there was a threat to the survival of the organizations, suddenly they were able to put lots more money, lots more effort, lots more capital. And so those kind of changes, were actually made. So I think that's a lot I think those two things are the primary things as to why health and well-being is struggling, as with climate change and all the other things inside organizations in getting that traction inside.
Excellent. Some nice interesting points there. So as you flag the obvious disconnect typically with the off the peg solution, because there is no one size fits all scenario that's going to work. Clients ironically not sufficiently invested really in the use and productivity of the buildings they're commissioning effectively. And a nice point about whether we're putting it in the thrive rather than the survive mindset, if you like. And that does present a challenge for the business case, as you candidly said, because there's a lot of short-termism, there's a lot of focus on the clear and present danger, and without, for instance, COVID, it is not getting that level of immediate attention. So we're getting into some of the nub of the problems now. So Chris, if I come to you in this more difficult middle section, so we can all see all day, smartphones increasingly putting power in the hands of the consumer, apps help us measure, manage so much of our daily lives and lifestyles, except bizarrely in the home, where arguably we use them less, and yet we spend the greatest amount of our time. So my question to you is really, one, why is that going to change? And two, importantly, why would that change matter to the property developers, owners, managers, letting agents, landlords, the industry? Why would it matter to those on that side of the counter what the end users can now know and learn via the likes of their phone? How's that change going to impact things, Chris?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the industry, really, but you're seeing it for different reasons happen in different places. I think the fundamental drivers I've already talked about are this massive issue that people are becoming much more aware of. And yeah, we do spend a lot of time at home, and we're spending more time at home with this kind of move to, remote working and things like that. And we can also see that things are, will have been getting worse. And on top of that, we've even seen where we've deployed thousands of homes worth of connected carbon monoxide alarms, to take that for example. We've seen that in we've seen landlords where in the first 1,000 homes are connected carbon monoxide alarms, there's been at least a low medium level of carbon monoxide that has been undetected. So even though they have to do a gas safety check every year, which is probably more than like a lot of consumers will have. Let's point this out as well. In social housing, they do a lot of checks, annual checks. The alarm systems are much more advanced than what people have in their homes generally. So that's just something to point out first. But yeah, we found that there's a relatively that'd be 1% of homes that have low to high level CO. People were completely unaware of it. They've probably been living with that low level CO for a long time. Low level CO won't kill you, but it has big long-term psychological and physical effects. And you just think, if there's 100 people on this call, there's probably one person on this call, at least, that will be in that same conditions. It's quite scary, really. And that's just CO, and there's obviously all the other things I've talked about as well. Even with schools, CO2 sensors being required for school classrooms, as a standard, and we've connected up several thousand there and seen quite high CO2 levels, which is a proxy for indoor air quality. And there's been studies that showed that CO2 levels above 1,500 parts per million reduce your cognitive performance by 50%. So again, it's another, and we've seen that a lot in classrooms. So, it's just something that people, as people become more aware of it and data comes out, just like with, seatbelts and fire alarms and everything, it will become more and more legislated. So that's where it will go to. And I think we just have this change. So, up until now, smart home technologies, it's kind of novel, like rubbish quite often. So it's, you can change your light bulb to pink if someone is near your home or something like that, or you can sort of automatically open your curtains. Okay, this is kind of useful, but really it's just aimed at people with a lot of money. Whereas this is technology, just like those IT sensors in your cars. Even if you don't like technology, this is something that people will be interested in. And I think that Eddie said earlier about the survival instinct. This is, the business have this operate on the survival instinct. I think for us, up until recently, because like I said, we've started scaling quite a bit recently. But up until recently, let's say 2 years ago, we used to talk about IoT and these challenges in the industry. We get quite, from the masses, you get two responses. You'd either get, we don't really have mold problems. If you look at our repairs data, it's 1% of our repairs. But we know it's absolutely rubbish. It's like a third of the homes have got this issue. So that quickly went away when stuff started getting reported. So people started being honest. Also at the time, one of the other responses, and I still get it sometimes, is, well, yeah, we know we've got lots of issue with damp and mold and things like this, but to be honest with you, we'd rather not know exactly the extent of it because we've not got the resources to fix it, and that's the survival instinct. But the time's up for that, because of all this stuff in the media, because people are becoming more aware of it, and because the technology is there that can at least give some sort of baseline and an indicator of where issues might be. We're seeing it being much more widely adopted. We're moving from this phase of like head in the sand to actually being proactive and being sort of responsible and holding yourself accountable. And what that means for a landlord is they can get a better view of their stock. But also, we can get residents a free to access smart home app that's more advanced than anything you can get in the consumer space at the moment. It gives you those different insights, different factors and things that you can do on a day-to-day basis. And I'll give you a quick example of that. One of the users that we had recently in one of our user groups that we sort of work closely with for research. They were using the app and they had like a high mold risk in the summer. They knew it's because they dried clothes inside. They didn't realize that before until they got some additional information around what humidity is and what it does and all these kind of things. But they dried clothes inside. They didn't really have much choice. But they kind of got frustrated with it, having this molds in the year rounds and this high risk in the summer, which is relatively unusual. And then in the winter, they bought a condenser dryer. They're in this flat. They went from drying clothes on doors and everywhere in this small flat to putting it in a condenser dryer, and it reduced the risk to low during the winter. So that's not necessarily a workable solution for every social tenant because not necessarily everyone can afford a condenser dryer. But the point is, when people have the knowledge and they understand what their current situation is, what it means to their health, what they can do about it, they will have an impact. So landlords shouldn't be afraid to be proactive and try and work together with the residents rather than blaming them or assuming that it's always them that's wrong. But I think that fundamentally this kind of technology is going to be a legal requirement in the future. I don't know when, but it will happen because it's the only way we can hold ourselves accountable for these conditions, particularly in the rental sector. Yeah, so that's it. I think that's what it'll be. Right now, we're seeing that change though. More and more landlords are being proactive.
Yeah, excellent, thanks. Yeah, so as you suggest, we're sort of moving very much from the head in the sand attitude, and there might be a number of reasons for that, to a more proactive approach. You know, knowledge is power effectively, and we're seeing it more in the hands of the consumer. And I suppose I might note that I, like many others, have probably seen ACO advertising significantly, I think, on TV and the like. So clearly, yeah, exactly. So clearly, you see the connection between awareness and demand, and obviously industry, landlord and sector response. So clearly, there's an increasing driver there coming from the occupant, the tenant, the resident. So Oliver, coming to you then in the last of these sort of more challenging, tougher questions. So when it comes to healthy buildings, I think we've already said, you know, we often talk in terms of spotting signs and symptoms of bad health, you know, like damp, mold, dark, cold, and fixing the unhealthy, understandably, to tackle deprivation, help lift living standards, which is critical. But it's all a bit like A&E for buildings. It's like emergency stuff. So is this kind of public and environmental health approach, is it setting the bar really way too low? And does what we know about benefits of biophilic design and well-being mean we should actually redefine what we mean by healthy, more than just no harm?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, as Chris mentioned, you know, we need to have data, we need to have information. And there was a nice quote from this white paper that we wrote that basically said, without data, you're just another person with an opinion.
Yeah.
And what we tend to find is that when we have commercial clients coming to us to discuss workplace redesign, is that we will have a single point of contact, which is generally a facilities manager, who will quantify the sort of sizes and spaces that they need, but without having any further data on why they need it, or incorporating other key elements within the organization that will bring forward really valuable information for us. So, you know, what we then speak to, you know, when we discuss these kind of quite practical requirements of the brief from a facilities manager is, you know, let's talk about some of the human resource elements. You know, let's talk about health and well-being, absenteeism, staff turnover, which bits of the office are popular or not. How can we get to the kind of root of exactly why you're here and what's going on? And I think fundamentally what it comes down to is there is one approach that is very quantitative, and another approach, which, you know, the quantitative aspects would be, you know, measuring the air quality, the temperature, humidity, the fenestration and light spread throughout a building. But the other very revealing aspect is the importance of recognizing the qualitative information that could come out. And to give you an example, we recently undertook a project called the Biophilic Office Project at the Building Research Establishment, the BRE in Watford. And in that, for the first year, what we did is we carried out a pre-occupancy evaluation of the people that was in an existing workplace. Now, what was interesting about this 1980s building was that fundamentally it was okay. You know, the light was kind of all right. The acoustics were okay. People were kind of used to it. The air temperature was okay, even though part of the heating system was broken. You know, things are off-gassed, so the air quality wasn't too bad. So it measured all right, and people were used to it. But when you pick up the qualitative information that we gathered, it was markedly different. People were embarrassed about the building. It was unloved, uncared for, didn't represent the values and ethos of the BRE itself. The people within the building were embarrassed to show guests around it. They didn't feel that the building delivered on the intended function of people being able to work, but also meet and talk and communicate and innovate. So there was this very marked difference between just measuring a building and also what people felt. So as a result, I feel that human-centered element, which in part does go down the route of, you know, what does the building look and feel like? You know, does it help support the intended activities? Are you coming into the office? Are you enjoying it? What's welcoming you in? Does it raise a smile? Some of these basic sort of human needs. How do you feel in the day? Are you stressed? Are you able to sleep at night? These sorts of questions were the things that we were asking of the occupants, and very key indicators of whether a building is actually working or not, whether or not it was, you know, had enough light, or you know, the temperature and humidity right. These things were kind of really important. So the biophilic design aspects, I think, are important because we've all had positive experiences of nature, and bringing elements of nature in has been shown across multiple studies to improve building outcomes and reduce negative costs. So multiple studies have shown that actually when we bring elements of nature in, it can improve productivity by anywhere between 6 and 15%. It can reduce absenteeism by 15%.
Yep.
So this historical data is important, but we do need to focus on what's going on right now. And as Chris has mentioned, setting a baseline. And I think also Eddie mentioned it as well, setting a baseline to understand where we're at and measuring both the quantitative and qualitative aspects. And that helps us really better evaluate the short-term cost versus the long-term gains. And that's the issue we've always had to get over when we're discussing sustainability, whether it's the carbon-centered element or the human-centered element.
Excellent, thank you, Oliver. So nicely pointed that nice quote there about data, moves us beyond just the anecdotal, the subjective, and it being merely a matter of opinion or how some people feel, and also beyond okay or all right in just technical or compliance or legal terms. Nice example you gave with the BRE study there, that it was in fact a very negative space for them to inhabit, and it was producing unhappy users, and it was an impactful thing, even though technically it was coming up as maybe okay or acceptable or fair to middling. So moving beyond that and the big difference that can have. So now then, if you like, that takes us nicely into the last section before the questions. I've already had one via LinkedIn. If you also want to type them, ideally in the Ask a Questions box at the bottom. So we're moving to the positives and hopes. This is the reasons to be cheerful. This is the rose-tinted spectacles, happy part of proceedings here. So we're going to look at how successful sustainable approaches to creating and maintaining healthy buildings can really give us this kind of win-win for both, if you like, the key parties involved, the property sector and the end user alike, plus of course the wider economy, environment and society. So Chris, coming to you first. So in a competitive sector, because let's be honest, it is competitive, social and private housing, how can smart technology make better health a plan of action, not just an aspiration? Give us the positive view on how it can make it action, not just aspiration.
Yeah, so first of all, going into that, it's a good. I really like the idea that Oliver's talking about around how sort of a building makes you feel like emotionally or mentally, and how that actually has an impact on your overall health. I think that's like quite a powerful thing, and it's something that resonates quite a lot with me and I guess anyone in sort of tech world, building products, because that's a huge factor in building a good product, is something which thinking about the emotional impact every element of it will have on someone, and not just the sort of key function. So I think that's really interesting. It's also why obviously Apple, one of the reasons they've been so successful. Yeah, I mean, in terms of it, how can you turn it into, how can you kind of create a plan? Well, I think to make any kind of plan, that you need a situational awareness to create a plan. Without any kind of awareness of a situation, it's difficult to create a plan to guide through that situation. To have that situation awareness, you really need data, and once you have that baseline data, you can really optimize for the challenges that you're facing, that the plan's trying to address. Against the resources that you have, and there's obviously quite a resource strapped area and lots of big challenges facing social housing. So if I just unpack that, let's take mold for instance. Earlier on, I talked about a case where a resident used the app. They kind of gave them some data, gave them some knowledge, and then they took action based on that. It's obviously not just stuff like that can fix it. There's many other things, as many people on this call know, like leaks or rising damp, penetrating damp, all those kind of things. We saw another case where, in a different landlord, where a resident had a really, really good conditions within the property, and suddenly there was a quick onset of black mold on one of the walls, and because it looked like the data suggested it looked like a structural issue rather than anything else, they sent someone around really quickly to check what this sudden onset was, and it turned out to be a leaky guttering, I think, after a storm that was leaking water into the internal wall and basically creating this issue. Again, having that data, they could create a plan. Up until having data, 90% of the time, it seems, according to the Ombudsman's report, a landlord will think it's the resident's fault. But in this case, clearly it isn't, and they're able to use that data to create a plan and solve the problem, not just in terms of that resident relationship, but also solving a problem early, fixing a piece of guttering rather than that going on for decades. And not just the health of the person, but the health of the actual building they need to maintain. On the other side of it, even just as a basic thing, as another good example, in terms of not having data for planning. And this isn't, you don't even really need IT for this, but I was speaking to a really big landlord recently, like tens of thousands of homes, probably closer to 100,000. There's a big change in legislation. You need carbon monoxide monitors in all rental properties now have gas. Really, really big, significant change happening this year, I think in October or something like that. And we're speaking to this landlord, and one of the reasons that they thought that IoT was great would be that right now they've got so many homes, they don't even know which ones have got carbon monoxide alarms in or not. So they're now going to have to go to, what's their plan? They're going to have to go to every home with an alarm and fit one if it's not there. You know, if you had that data, you could pick the homes that you need to go to. You could compare it to the ones that have got gas and then fit them. And obviously with IT, you get that. But it's just the point is that without data, you can't even plan. And again, the retrofit net zero is the real obvious one. You know, having data, if you know how energy efficient homes are, if you've got smart meter data, if you've got temperature, humidity information, ventilation information, not only can you decide which homes and which kind of archetypes to sort of hit first, but also you know, where they are and how to better plan that investment. I think this is the key bit though, because once, not only does it give you that sort of insight in terms of where you need to spend resources or prioritize resources, but it gives you a feedback loop, which is like the essential to any kind of control system. But that feedback loop requires some kind of data or some kind of suggestion of how close you were to what you wanted to hit. And this is why it's in a lot of those standards like PAS 2035 now, because once you've done the retrofit, you need to know, has it, you know, if you think you've retrofit homes that it would be net zero carbon, how do you know that without the data? You tick the boxes, but how do you actually know? It's why EPCs might include smart meter data in the future. I saw something, there's a government discussion around that. But that feedback loop is really important. And for retrofit, one of the biggest reasons for sensors actually isn't has it had the positive implication. Has it definitely not had any negative implications? And that's when it comes to things like, risk of mold from, say, thermal bridging, because insulation wasn't done correctly, or worsening ventilation because the ventilation units you've installed are insufficient for the type of property and all those kind of things. And so that's really key. You know, billions is going to get spent on retrofit rightly in the UK, and if we don't get that feedback loop early, we could spend the billions and then realise we need to spend billions again. And by the way, in that period of time, everyone's got much more unhealthy. I think so that's at the landlord level, and that's where this is being driven from. But the thing that what really drives us is this kind of improvement of people's health. It's not how do we help people meet legislation. Yeah, we have to do that. We have to think about that. But it's how do we kind of make people healthier, and that's where the apps, we think our resident app's great, but it's much more simpler at that level. We tell you what your situation is. This is the data. These are the insights we've got. Here's your mold risk. Here's your ventilation. Here's all this information. Here's your carbon monoxide, if there's any carbon monoxide levels. Give them the situation. We give them the knowledge as to what that actually means for their, in terms of their health and their family's health. And then we tell them what they can do about it. And then crucially, that there's a feedback loop so they can see if it's had the impact intended. And that's the key, really.
Excellent.
And that's just the baseline. Obviously, automated ventilation units and everything else comes next. But that, what we're looking at right now is that kind of baseline requirement.
Thank you. Yeah. So nice point about the visibility piece, if you like. If there's no awareness, there's no plan, and there's no optimal results. There's no results effectively. And health, if you like, I like your point that it's as it were a bit of like a personal professional crossover topic, and it can be a real driver for change in that sense, because it's bringing, especially through apps, the two parties together. So in this kind of and we're already getting a question I see coming in. So Oliver, coming to you now. So if I were to say, sort of looking ahead, the obstacle to holistic thinking, it's often just know where to start. People get worried about the big picture and trying to see the whole of the moon, if you like, at once. So what simple, practical baby steps might you ask owners or landlords to take first? Give us a couple of takeaways, please.
Well, I think, first of all, feedback. Without feedback, you're never going to know exactly what are the things that people are really thinking and feeling, and then gives you an opportunity to prioritize the issues that need to be addressed. And that feedback needs to be both, quantitative and qualitative. The likelihood is, if you kind of ask people questions, you can get them to score it, but also give them some written feedback and further kind of narratives and stories about what's going on. Capturing some of that, I think, is really important. I think, secondly, recognizing the market forces that are going on. We've heard about the outcome of COVID and what we're now seeing as the great resignation. People are unhappy with their working conditions, their working environments, and are voting with their feet. They're moving away from organizations that aren't supporting their physical, mental, and social well-being, and moving on. They're looking to kind of work for organizations that do. So much of this is about your ability to create spaces that are attractive and appealing and aspirational, to attract staff and to retain them as well. And between those points, how do you keep people productive, creative? If we're not going to be going into the office to do focused work, what's the point of the office? Well, I think probably to be creative and innovative. So how do you design all those aspects? And I think, fundamentally, we have to go beyond just being sustainable, being less bad. We have to think in a more regenerative way, think about how we can support spaces to go beyond, to actually do better and to put back into the environment, and to make people not just less healthy, but positively healthy, as discussed, to create spaces that not help people just survive, but also flourish and thrive. And I think that's really important. So those conversations about putting back are both carbon and human-centered. And I think finally, just having painting a picture of what does a nature-filled space look like is this is something that happens across a range of different spaces and a range of different times. We've seen health and well-being move away from just being about commercial spaces into residential, whether that's kind of social housing or build to rent, and now into the everyday kind of ownership and rental spaces. And we need to think about health and well-being in a much more holistic approach. We need to think about it across how we connect with the natural world across the year, across months and weeks and even days, and also across our built environment. And how do we connect with nature across our cities, into our neighborhoods, our buildings, and our interior spaces, right down to the materials that we touch and feel every day. And remember, we spend 90% of our lives indoors. So question then comes down to, what is it that constitutes a healthy interaction with nature, and how much of it do we need?
Excellent, thank you. So lots of good points there. Number one, you made strongly feedback. You need to know what people are thinking and feeling. Two, nice point, timely about, we're hearing a lot about the great resignation. So it's critical, these kind of environments are critical to talent attraction and retention. There are clear triple bottom line benefits there. Thirdly, the regenerative, restorative kind of approach, positively healthy, beyond less bad. I think we've touched on that quite a bit. And then finally, I think a nice point about, needing to visualize, if you like, some of these connections to nature and some of what healthy actually looks like. Painting pictures, we use that figuratively speaking often when we're describing things. We need to help us paint the picture. Well, literally, I think we do need to give visuals and images and give people some perception of where this might be going to help it become, in some cases, less of a scientific or technical discussion. So some very nice points there. So then finally then, Eddie, and then we'll jump to the questions. We're moving into the final 10 minutes virtually now. So Eddie, just quickly, if you like, a bit of future gazing for you. Fast forward maybe 5 or 10 years. I wonder if you could just give us a taster of how health could become actually a key measure of building success. How is health going to be that metric?
Yeah, very, very quickly, because I am conscious we're kind of running out of time here. My feeling is that climate change is actually going to be the thing that predominates over the next 10 years. And with that, we're going to see sort of development of organizations that actually are seen to care about the planet and to care about the people that work for them. With this, my feeling is we'll see improvements in technology, and Chris already spoke about a lot of the technology improvements that are coming along. But we'll actually see the development of what's called now mobile health. That's the development of wearable technologies, sensing technologies that will be going onto people's bodies, in their hands and in their buildings, so they will be able to see in an instant what the condition of the environment that they're actually in is, and whether or not to stay there or whether to move. And going back to this preventative health thing that I talked about before. So we're going to have this collision between a more rapidly changing, increasingly user-focused built environment and the need for, as Oliver put it, more skilled, tech-savvy employees who themselves will actually be more conscious about the health threats posed by those environments that they're working in. My feeling sort of just in the immediate future is that the pandemic is passing, and we're already seeing that this new normal is becoming just normal. Everybody just seems to want to get back to what they were doing. Debt inside organizations is high right now. That survival instinct I talked about is higher than ever. So the well-being and biophilia and that kind of thing, that still seemingly looks like it's going to be a tough ask. But on the other side of the coin, I think due to COVID-19 and the impacts of, my wife here is suffering with long COVID. The school that she's part of has got still several members of staff that are missing. So businesses will be dealing with absenteeism, presenteeism, and this alone, I think, will mean that they'll want to do more. So that will be a clear and present danger that is actually starting to impact on the survive mechanism. And so you will see that health and well-being will become much more important a factor as we go into the next sort of decade or so. And our experience is in the field that many businesses want more training. I think Chris talked about the fact that, just knowledge and knowledge transfer to users on the ground and much more ability to understand what the tools that they actually have at their command to make things better, to make their health better, to make their conditions better. I think this whole role of training and even the built environment itself needs to embrace and be much more matter of fact about the level of training that actually needs to happen for buildings and building systems when we actually hand them over at the end.
Excellent.
So, for that, just as a very final plug for people who want to just I suppose get to grips with some of this kind of stuff, I would direct you to the Well-Build Health and Safety Seal. Have a look at that. There's a lot of really good information in there. You don't necessarily have to go and buy it, but I do think it's a really good source for people who do want to
Excellent.
start to think about these things.
Thanks, Eddie. Some really good points there. Looking ahead, nice one about mobile health. In effect, people can measure with the help of wearable tech, literally the relative health as they go from building to building, or from room to room potentially, which is an interesting idea. And good mention of that word training. We haven't perhaps touched on that enough, in that there is, with everything of this sort, to some degree, there is a skills question to which we should respond. And speaking of questions, then, we've got a couple in already. We're into the last few minutes, so I'm going to ask for good snappy answers. So this first one from Lucy, you kind of touched on it, Eddie, so I'm going to throw this to Oliver and Chris. So Lucy's asking, do you think interest in IAQ will wane as COVID restrictions are lifted? So first Chris and then Oliver, if I could ask you to be brief. As the pandemic hopefully passes, we talked about the influence it's having on pushing these things. Is that going to wane? Are we going to move on? So Chris, is the heat going to move off this area as the pandemic moves away, hopefully?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just increased. I think the pandemic, like I said earlier, is one of the drivers for it. I think it's already laced into most standards, and it's a kind of progression towards that. I mean, just in terms of I mentioned earlier about advancing technology and battery power and things like that. But what just to put that perspective on that, we've got devices that can send data every 10 minutes and last for 10 years without replacing a battery. It's very convenient. Business case is very strong. And there's a sort of specified requirement there. COVID's really brought about this, and this is from speaking to people that are involved in ventilation at the government level. But what COVID's highlighted, so part of health and safety standards, everyone should have well ventilated buildings. But what COVID highlighted was that nobody knows how ventilated their buildings are because there's no data. Nobody actually knows. And not only don't they know, but they couldn't report on it in any kind of way. And that's why suddenly there's CO2 sensors required in schools and buildings and everywhere else that you need to have them at a conference we're going to next week. So that kind of highlighted this issue and caused this requirement for CO2 sensors. But all it's done is highlight an issue that already existed. And I think building regs has just been updated so that any non-domestic property has to have a CO2 sensor in it, for example. You've got this in Scotland as well. And then if you look across the world at other countries, And some of them are a little bit ahead of us. So I think Belgium is a little bit ahead of us on this.
Nice points there. So in a sense, once we've lifted back the curtain, there's no going back, if you like, and COVID's done that. So Oliver, same question to you then, perhaps more broadly then. So they're asking about IAQ, but broadly, you did mention in some of your earlier comments, I think, that COVID has definitely brought some of this up the agenda and brought a bit of focus. Is there a fear, is there a risk that basically the debate's going to move on and the focus is going to move off, Oliver?
I don't think so, because I think there's a wider societal awareness of the impact that poor air quality has, both within our cities, our towns, and our streets. And we've seen sort of some notable, very sad cases of children dying from poor air quality in their neighbourhoods. And I think this has raised a general level of awareness. COVID has highlighted airborne viruses and other sort of toxins. So I think as we move back into the shared built environment, people are going to, in general, be much more conscious of it. Are much more demanding of the quality of air, whether they have that immediate data or not. What I am seeing is more and more products coming onto the market that can help retrofit spaces, can be retrofitted into spaces. We've been working with a company called Blue Air recently that helps to kind of improve air quality in spaces and gives a little bit of data and feedback both on an app and on the device itself. So I think we're seeing generally in the design industry greater awareness of how we can improve air quality, and as it's been mentioned, Chris mentioned, the need for ventilation, but also how we can bring better indoor air quality through lower impact products such as natural paints, reduced volatile organic compounds, brominated fire retardants. So I think the conversation is there. People have become aware of it. It's a sort of silent killer that is now becoming much more well heard.
Absolutely. So last couple of minutes, and we're moving fast now. I've got there's a little nice little question there from Sarah Deakin in the chat, actually. So I've got a question here for Eddie, but maybe Chris and Oliver might want to comment a little on Sarah Deakin's. You could reply by typing in the chat because we're nearly out of time. Eddie, I had a question come in for you via LinkedIn, or so for you. It's about sticks, not carrots. Very quickly, can we regulate tighter? Can we insert clauses and conditions into contracts to make better performance happen? So in other words, can we get there with penalties and payments terms? Can we use sticks, Eddie? Quick answer, please.
My kind of view on that is, no, this is not going to be a stick. I mean, the health and wellbeing agenda is one where we have to have organizations that really do want to do it and do it well. Otherwise it's health and wellbeing wash, the same way we get greenwashing, all of that kind of thing. So I would say this is something that, I think it is something that's going to grow over time. It's going to be driven by the younger population, just the same way that sustainability has been driven by the younger population. But it is going to come and it is going to predominate. I'm pretty confident of that.
Excellent. Thank you. So, right, we are right on the hour now. So I'm going to ask Chris, I'm going to invite you to just mention a couple of closing words. Because I'm going to say to you, so healthy buildings. So whether people are in the design, the specification, procurement, maintenance, wherever they are, whatever piece in the jigsaw puzzle, I'm going to ask you, how do you encourage them to, as it were, embrace their inner geek and just seize the opportunities offered by data to do whatever it is they do better? So give us a last closing comment, if you like, if you don't mind my phraseology there. How do you get people just to enjoy what data can offer, even if they're not techie people?
Yeah, I think a lot of people in the industry that specifically in this area are already doing it. I think when it comes to innovation, just outside technology, people already know that they need data, and anyone that's doing retrofit, will go beyond these sensors to some extent when they're doing sort of, these evaluations, but rather than IT being on the ground measuring more complicated things. So I think that element already there. But I suppose in terms of innovation, I think the big thing that helps with innovation is this kind of idea that you can't be afraid to take risk and be afraid of like failing. One of the things that prevents technology uptake is this kind of fear of technology, or just a general kind of human fear of novelty. I suppose from not wanting to try a new berry that might poison you or something like that. But there is a general kind of adverse reaction to new things, and that's when I was talking earlier on and relating to this question in the chat. But that landlords used to say, well, there's going to be all these problems and we can't deal with it, and there's all this kind of fear, and it's all these like negative, all the kind of reasons it's not going to work is that fear. And we found that just basically actually when people have started to adopt it, not only can residents sort of help, solve the problems, so people can actually preventatively maintain the homes, they've got the knowledge and the data, but also improves the relationship. Landlords, I often hear that the residents going to use it as a stick to beat them with and everything like that. But the reality is, we see it just improves the relationship, because it's like a sort of agnostic piece of information which says this is the problem, rather than the landlord blaming the resident blaming the landlord. And then the last thing on that is, you can either deal with an issue now, and an issue which is becoming more and more reported in the news every day, or you can deal with it in 2 years, and it's going to be easier to start dealing with it now than waiting until you're the last and you've got to spend all the money in one go. So
excellent. Very nice points too, and a little bit of myth busting for us to finish with there. And really, you're encouraging, de-risk some of this perception, get over the fear factor and embrace it. And in fact, it can make it easier and cheaper if you deal with it sooner and in a more collaborative and responsive fashion. So nice points to finish on. So we are at the hour. In fact, we're about a minute over. So in closing then, big thank you to all our panelists, Eddie, Oliver, and of course, Chris, and our sponsors, the lovely people at ACO. Also to yourselves, our virtual audience out there on Crowdcast, for your comments and questions. Reminder to check out elementalexpo.com. As I said at the top of the show, it's the online community for professionals focused on innovation, heat, water, air, and energy, vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. Full diary of events on the website, back catalogue. This will be available almost within minutes after we finish and close the window here. So thanks once again to our panel. That's it for today. I've been Jim McClelland, editor at SustMeme. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you, everybody. Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.